Genocide. This ominous term reminds us of the darkest depth of human cruelty. The deliberate and systematic destruction of entire nations, cultures, and identities. Genocide stands as a living testament to the magnitude that killings can reach when power and prejudice converge with hatred. When and why have attempts been made to annihilate entire nations? What lies at the roots of genocides? Is genocide possible in today's world? Today we're discussing genocide throughout history.
Watch this.
Until 1944, the term genocide did not exist. To describe intentional killings, terms such as massacre, extermination, crime against humanity, and others were used. In 1944, a Polish lawyer of Jewish descent named Raphael Lemkin defined the Nazi policy of systematic extermination of European Jews. He proposed the term genocide, combining two Greek words. Genos means people, race, or tribe, and kaido means to kill. Lemkin was born in the territory of the Russian Empire and witnessed many Jewish pogroms, which were part of the policy of the imperial government. During the Holocaust, he managed to escape by immigrating to the United States, but 49 of his relatives were killed by Nazi Germans. After World War II, the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg accused Nazi leaders of crimes against humanity. The word genocide was included in the indictment, but as a descriptive, not as a legal official term. Since the horrific crimes of the Holocaust garnered widespread attention in the global community, and in large part due to Lemkin's persistent efforts, on December 9, 1948, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Prevention Convention and Punishment of the Genocide Crime. The convention defines genocide as actions committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Genocide includes killing members of such a group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the group's physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Complicity in genocide and public incitement to commit genocide are also recognized as international crimes. It doesn't matter when or by whom genocide is committed, whether it's in peacetime or wartime, by individuals or governments. In terms of extraditing those responsible, genocide is not considered a political crime, and those guilty of it should not be granted political asylum. The original version of the convention also included political killings in the definition of genocide. Guess which country initiated the removal of such a provision? Correct, Soviet Union. Convention marked the culmination of Raphael Lemkin's years-long struggle for international recognition of genocide as a crime against humanity. Interestingly, he interpreted this concept very broadly, also identifying Soviet genocide. Based on this, he was the first to consider the Holodomor in Ukraine in 1933 as a genocide. From ancient times to the present day, there have been numerous cases of genocide in history. Today, we will discuss both of the most well-known examples and those which our applicability of the term genocide remains a subject of debate.
Watch this.
The first genocide of the 20th century is considered to be the extermination of the Herero and Nama tribes by Germans on the territory of modern-day Namibia. After Britain declared its disinterest in Namibian territories, Germany declared them as its protectorate in 1884. Colonizers seized the land and resources of the country and employed forced labor to extract diamonds. In January 1904, a rebellion broke out against Germans, with rebel forces numbering between 6,000 to 8,000 people. The total local population amounted to 60,000 to 80,000 people, with 80% being Herero. To suppress the rebellion, 14,000 German soldiers were sent. During the decisive battle, almost all the rebels managed to escape southeast into the Kalahari Desert. A German general, von Trotta, who commanded the German forces, ordered the borders of the habitable territory to be sealed off, leaving Africans to die in the desert from thirst and hunger. Thus, at this stage, the suppression of the uprising turned into genocide. Von Trotha issued a proclamation declaring that all Herero people must leave their land. Massive killings began. Those who surrendered were placed in concentration camps, where many died from forced labor and exhaustion. It was in Namibia that Germans first employed the practice of containing men, women, and children in concentration camps. The Herero tribe was almost entirely exterminated and today constitutes a small part of Namibia's population. In 1985, a UN report classified the destruction of the tribe as acts of genocide. In 2004, Germany acknowledged committing genocide in Namibia.
Watch this.
It is believed that Raphael Lemkin coined the term genocide to describe the Holocaust. However, he claimed that the term was proposed to denote the Armenian extermination in 1915. The Armenian genocide was organized and carried out in the territories controlled by Ottoman Empire. Its population was ethnically and religiously diverse. Muslim peoples, such as Turks, Kurds, Circassians, and others, coexisted with Christians, including Armenians, Greeks, and Bulgarians. Non-Muslim nationalities, including Armenians, were considered second-class citizens. By the mid-19th century, there were about 2.5 million Armenians in the territories controlled by Ottoman Empire. They were prohibited from carrying weapons, had to pay higher taxes, and were not allowed to testify in court. Seeking greater autonomy, Armenians started forming political organizations in the late 19th century. This increased doubts among Ottoman authorities about the loyalty of Armenian population. 70% of Armenians were impoverished peasants. However, among the Muslim population, a stereotype of the cunning and successful Armenian merchant prevailed. Those Armenians who managed to become wealthy stirred resentment among Muslims. These processes were complicated by an influx of Muslim refugees from the Caucasus, newly formed Balkan states, and Crimean Tatars fleeing from the oppression of Russia. Refugees who were expelled from their lands by Christians transferred their hatred to local Christians. In 1894–96, a series of massive killings of the Armenian population occurred. The pretext was the protests and demands of Armenians for greater rights. Armenian pogroms took place in many cities of the empire, including Istanbul. The organizers were Ottoman government. The killings were carried out under direct orders from Sultan Abdul Hamid II. Usually, provocateurs sent by the authorities gathered Muslims in mosques and announced on behalf of the Sultan that Armenians had started a rebellion. Then armed Turks attacked the neighborhoods where they lived. Armenians were beaten to death, their throats were cut, and they were shot. Neither women nor children nor the elderly were spared. Thousands of Armenians were burned alive in churches when they sought refuge there. There is currently no comprehensive study of those events. Undoubtedly, the killings were organized with the consent and on the orders of the authorities. However, the extent of their involvement is still a matter of debate. Senseless killings in Istanbul were carried out in the presence of the diplomatic corps. European envoys protested, but the matter did not progress beyond note exchanges. The exact number of victims of that massacre is impossible to determine. According to various researchers, estimates between 50,000 and 300,000 people perished. The mass killings of the late 19th century in Turkey are not considered part of the genocide that unfolded there 20 years later. However, they served as a grim harbinger of the future tragedy.
Watch this.
In 1908, as a result of a revolution, the Young Turks and nationalist movement came to power in Ottoman Empire. Their program included slogans of universal equality and brotherhood among all peoples of the empire. Therefore, in the initial stage, Armenians supported the Young Turk government. However, for Muslim population, which lost its privileged position with the adoption of the new constitution, this resulted in new aggression. The new laws allowed Christians to carry weapons, leading to active arming of Armenian population. In response, Muslims initiated a new series of pogroms in Cilicia. In April 1909, about 30,000 Armenians perished. The Young Turks quickly forgot their promises and embarked on a campaign of forced Turkification of the population. They rejected the idea of a multi-ethnic Ottoman state and aimed to create a homogeneous Turkish society. Thus, the numerous Armenian population became an obstacle to achieving this goal. Mass atrocities often occurred during times of war. The extermination of Armenians was linked to the events of World War I. The Ottoman Empire joined the war on the side of the Central Powers, which were fighting against the Allies. In early December 1914, they suffered a devastating defeat on the Caucasian front. The Russians' victory was significantly aided by Armenian volunteers. This led to the spread of the notion of Armenian betrayal. In early 1915, a secret meeting of young Turk leaders took place. During the meeting, a plan for the wholesale extermination of Armenian people was formulated. In April 24, 1915, several hundred prominent representatives of Armenian intelligentsia were arrested and subsequently annihilated in Istanbul. This date is considered the beginning of the genocide. The authorities initiated the deportation of the population. Civilian population was driven into camps located in the barren southern provinces. During these death marches, Armenians were attacked, robbed, tortured, and killed. They died from hunger and dehydration. Hundreds perished on the way before reaching the camps. Regional authorities, following orders from Istanbul, organized massive executions. Armenian pogroms and the murder of hundreds of thousands of Armenians occurred in all cities of the empire. Tens of thousands were forcibly converted to Islam. Around 300,000 Armenian men, conscripted into the Turkish army, were first disarmed and then killed. Armenian soldiers were subjected to medical experiments for the development of typhus. The majority of them perished. The genocide was carried out concurrently with the destruction of cultural heritage. Armenian monuments and churches were exploded, cemeteries were plowed over, Armenian neighborhoods were destroyed or settled by Turks and Kurds who took an active part at the genocide. The number of victims varies by estimates reaching around 1.5 million people. In early 1920s, a group of Armenian activists decided to carry out a retaliatory operation. Some of these leaders of the Young Turks who were involved in the organization of the genocide were killed. The Armenian genocide has been recognized and condemned by many countries worldwide and influential organizations. Turkey continues to vehemently oppose its recognition using various means including propaganda, fact distortion, and political lobbying.
Watch this.
The Armenian genocide, in terms of its scale and number of victims, overshadowed equally tragic events taking place concurrently in Ottoman Empire. An identical genocide also occurred against the Pontic Greeks and Assyrians. The Pontic Greeks originate from the thousand shores of the Black Sea, as well as from the Caucasus region. Similar to the Armenians, it all began with the forced deportation of Greek population, followed by pogroms and killings. The intensity and extent of the persecutions were such that even Turkey's Austro-German allies, not known for their humanitarianism, expressed objections. The genocide of Greeks unfolded in two stages. During World War I, around 170,000 people perished. A year after its conclusion, a war between Greece and Turkey erupted, and violence against Pontic Greeks flared up with renewed vigor. Another 120,000 people were exterminated. As of today, the genocide is recognized by Greece, Cyprus, Armenia, Sweden, and 7 American states. Turkey, naturally, does not acknowledge the Greeks' extermination as genocide and opposes international discussion of the matter. Slightly more countries recognize an Assyrian genocide. The Assyrians are a people originating from the ancient population of the Middle East who adopted Christianity. Similar to other non-Muslim populations of Ottoman Empire, they faced centuries of persecution, culminating in their mass annihilation from 1915 to 1923. The pattern was the same as the one observed in the Armenian and Greek exterminations. Deportations resulting in the death of large portion of those expelled, mass executions, and pogroms. During the genocide, over 750,000 people were killed, significantly impacting the future development of this minority ethnicity. Today, the Assyrian people, scattered around the world, continue to demand recognition of the genocide on their historic lands from the international community and Turkey.
Watch this.
Alongside the annihilation of the Armenians, the most well-known example of genocide in the 20th century is undoubtedly the Holocaust. The catastrophe of European Jewry was the result of systematic policies carried out by Nazi Germany. Starting from the late 19th century, racial anti-Semitism gained traction in Germany and Austria. Jews were regarded as carriers of biologically inferior traits and were seen as a threat to the nation's existence. The National Socialists made racial anti-Semitism the cornerstone of their ideology. The question of how to eliminate Jews captured Hitler's attention from his youth. When he came to power in 1933, he began to implement his ideas. In Nazi ideology, Jews were considered the antithesis and primary enemy of the Aryan race. The persecution commenced with the boycott of Jews in April 1, 1933, and was followed by subsequent waves of racial laws. The Nuremberg Laws, adopted at the Nazi Party Congress in 1935, stipulated that only those with German blood could be citizens of the Reich. This essentially stripped German Jews of their citizenship. Marriages to Germans became criminal offenses. Anti-Jewish hysteria led to mass pogroms in the night of November 10, known as Kristallnacht. Despite the discriminatory policies, the genocide did not commence immediately. Initially, Germans attempted to expel Jews from the country, but often they had nowhere to go. Most countries prohibited the entry of Jewish refugees. The Nazis devised several plans to address the Jewish question. They proposed to Moscow to accept Reich Jews in the USSR. Plans were developed for the relocation of the Jewish population to Madagascar and the creation of a Jewish reservation in the occupied Polish territory in Lublin. None of these projects were implemented. When the World War II started, Nazi Germans occupied regions where Jewish population was concentrated: Poland, the Baltic states, Ukraine, and Belarus. The mass extermination of Jewish population effectively began with the invasion of the Soviet Union. Ghettos were established in major cities, where all the Jews from the cities and nearby settlements were confined. The largest ghetto was in Warsaw, housing 480,000 people. All Jews were required to wear special symbols, yellow six-pointed stars. The Jewish population of the Soviet Union was generally exterminated immediately after the capture of settlements in their residential areas. Natural ravines were found near every city, near many villages, where people were herded and shot. The largest and most infamous was Babi Yar in Kiev, where about 150,000 people perished. In the second half of 1941 alone, approximately 1 million Jews were killed in the territories of occupied USSR. After the war with the USSR began, responsibility for the final solution to the Jewish question was assigned to Reinhard Heydrich. In January 1942, he convened a conference in the Berlin suburb of Wannsee, where a program for the extermination of all Jews in Europe was approved. This decision was not publicized, and few could believe that such a thing was possible in the middle of the 20th century in a country with a millennia-long history and a developed culture. Adolf Eichmann was directly responsible for the organizational aspects of the genocide.
Watch this.
In Poland, death camps were established. They were not initially designed for accommodating a large number of people, only for rapid extermination. Trains from across Europe arrived in the east. In early December 1941, the first death camp was initiated in Chelmno. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Belzec, Majdanek, Sobibor followed. The average time from arrival to death in the gas chamber ranged from 1 to 2 hours. By 1942, the majority of Jews from Eastern and Central Europe and a significant portion from Western Europe had been exterminated. Changing fronts forced the Nazis to alter their plans. Camps and ghettos were liquidated upon retreat, and in Auschwitz, Jews from Italy, Norway, Belgium, and Hungary were urgently sent for extermination. Out of 10 million Jews living in Germany before catastrophe, 6 million were annihilated. There is no comprehensive list of victims. The Nazis wiped out entire communities. No relatives remained to report the names of the deceased. As a result of the Nazi genocide, Yiddish culture, as a way of life for Eastern European Jewry, declined and extinguished. The main culprits stood before the Nuremberg tribunal and subsequent trials, with many being executed. Some fled to South America, whose regimes willingly accepted Nazis after the war. Adolf Eichmann hid in Argentina for 15 years. In 1960, he was abducted by Israeli intelligence, taken to Israel, and executed based on a court verdict. Certain historians characterize the Nazi policy towards Slavs as genocide. However, there were no plans to exterminate all Slavs, unlike the plans for genocide of Jews and Roma. Among the ethnic groups persecuted by the Nazis under racial laws were also the Roma. They were seen as a threat to racial purity. Official propaganda proclaimed Germans as representatives of a pure Aryan race originating from India. However, the Roma are much closer descendants of India. They share ethnic closeness and speak a language from the Indo-Aryan group. In other words, Roma are no less Aryans than the Germans themselves. Nazi theorists struggled to reconcile this and came up with an explanation. Roma were declared the result of interbreeding between the Aryan race and the world's lower races. Tens of thousands of Roma were killed in death camps. Around a quarter of all Roma in Europe, approximately 220,000 people, perished as a result of the genocide. At the same time, within the occupied Kingdom of Yugoslavia, a genocide against Serbs was taking place. The main organizers were the fascist Ustaše regime in Croatia and German occupying authorities. A system of concentration camps was established, which became sites of mass killings. Around 800,000 Serbs were killed and approximately 240,000 were forcibly converted to Catholicism. The genocide of Serbs reshaped the ethnic landscape of modern-day Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and significantly deteriorated relations between Serbs and Croats.
Watch this.
One of the darkest chapters in human history was written just 30 years ago. In Rwanda, within just 100 days, up to 1 million people lost their lives. The genocide against the Tutsi population was orchestrated by the political elite of Rwanda and executed by army, gendarmerie, extremist groups, and civilians. The Tutsi and Hutu tribes had inhabited the Rwandan territory for many centuries. Residing on the same land, practicing the same religion, speaking the same language, and sharing a common culture, they constituted distinct social and professional groups. The Tutsi minority formed the aristocracy and the backbone of the military, while the Hutu, making up 80% of the population, were economically and politically dependent on the Tutsi. In April 6, 1994, the plane carrying the presidents of Rwanda and neighboring Burundi, both of Hutu ethnicity, was shut down. The genocide began on the same day. Hutu radicals blamed the Tutsi for the president's death and commenced their mass extermination. The organizers of the genocide encouraged the Hutu population to arm themselves and kill their Tutsi neighbors, rape women, and seize their property. Radio of a Thousand Hills, known as RTLM, played a significant role in inflaming the genocide. The radio station's name referred to Rwanda's nickname, the Land of a Thousand Hills. On air, political commentators directly incited the killing of Tutsi. The organizers aimed to eliminate all Tutsi living in the country. Most victims perished in their own communities, primarily at the hands of local residents and neighbors. Local authorities and radio stations encouraged citizens to kill their neighbors. Hutu gangs searched schools and churches to find and exterminate Tutsi. Tutsi women were subjected to widespread sexual violence. The destruction of infrastructure and the significant death toll had severe repercussions on the economy. Mass rapes led to a spike in HIV/AIDS infections. Many Tutsi and Hutu were forced to flee their homes and continue to live as refugees in the region. The international community, preoccupied with the war in Bosnia at the time, failed to assess the scale of the tragedy and respond in a timely manner. Later, US President Clinton regarded the US's non-intervention in the genocide as a major failure in his foreign policy. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, who acknowledged personal responsibility for the events, stated, "The international community failed Rwanda." The International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda was established. Notably, journalists from RTLM were among the accused. This serves as a stark reminder to present-day Russian propagandists who call for the genocide of Ukrainians. Former Prime Minister Jean Kambanda received a life sentence. He remains the only head of government who admitted guilt in the genocide, at least for now.
Watch this.
In February 2022, by initiating an aggressive war against Ukraine, Russia is carrying out actions that fall under the definition of genocide. Following the discovery of evidence of mass killings in Bucha, Izium, and other places, several world leaders directly accused Russia of committing genocide against Ukrainians. In November 2022, the US Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe held a briefing urging Congress to recognize Russia's actions in Ukraine as genocide. According to experts' assessments, these actions align with all 5 criteria of genocide outlined in the UN Convention. Renowned history professor Timothy Snyder has presented undeniable evidence of Russia's committed genocide. Firstly, the unjustified invasion itself, leading to the mass killing of civilians, is already an act of genocide. The second type of crimes includes bombings in hospitals and schools, causing severe bodily harm or injury. The third is creating unbearable living conditions, disrupting energy supply systems, and taking actions to reduce the civilian population. Mass executions and violence constitute the fifth type of genocide-related crimes. Lastly, and proudly acknowledged by the perpetrators themselves, are abductions and forcible children deportation. Speeches from Kremlin propaganda and official figures, including Putin, provide evidence of criminal intent to commit genocide. The genocidal actions against Ukrainians by Russia have been recognized as such by the parliament of 7 countries, as well as Verkhovna Rada in Ukraine. In April 2023, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe recognized the deportation and forced movement of Ukrainian children to Russia as having characteristics of genocide. The International Court in The Hague has issued arrest warrants for President Putin and Russia's children's ombudsman Maria Lviv-Belova. According to the court's judgment, they bear responsibility for the deportation of children. However, this is not the first time that Russians have committed genocide against Ukrainians. The horrifying artificial famine of 1932-33, orchestrated by Stalin and his associates, claimed the lives of millions. As of August 2023, Holodomor has been recognized as genocide by 32 countries and 6 churches around the world. It's worth noting that it was Raphael Lemkin, the individual who coined and classified the term genocide, who first proposed considering these actions as genocide. Sooner or later, under the weight of undeniable facts, the global community will recognize Russia's current actions in Ukraine as genocide. And sooner or later, all those responsible for the systematic destruction of the Ukrainian people will be held accountable. There is no doubt about this. To be continued.